nice to be with you again this evening. And as Jared just mentioned, we will be having a question and answer session immediately following this session together. So if you have any questions already in mind or questions come up through the course of our study, make sure to jot them down so you remember. And we'll explain the process of how we'll handle the questions after this session. So let me go ahead and get my screen share up, and then we will begin. All right, let's bow our heads for prayer at this time. Father in heaven, we're thankful for your goodness to us, for this Sabbath day we've been able to share, even though we may not be in the same place at the same time. We're still able to have a meeting of the minds, studying together over Zoom. I pray, Lord, you will be with those who are still joining us, and for those who may be watching this later. I pray you will guide our minds now as we think about some practical aspects in relation to debt and how we ought to approach this subject as Christians. Give us wisdom now as we study, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. So the topic you see on your screen, slaves with smallpox, dealing with debt. Oh, where does that title come from? What does that have to do with debt? Well, you will see in just a moment. So I mentioned previously, I'll mention it again, the savingthecrumbs.com website is a blog my wife and I have written about in the past regarding our journey with personal finance. Some of the things are a little bit more lighthearted. Some of it is quite personal, and we reveal quite a bit as far as even how much we earn and how much we spend and how much we give away and all those kinds of things. And my wife has shared a number of tips regarding recipes and kitchen related things that a lot of families want to learn how to save money in the grocery bill and the food budget. So there are all sorts of things like that on the website that you can look up there. And also audioverse.org. This is where the ministry that I run as the executive director, you can find two series of seminars I did there at GYC, Beyond the Tithe and For the Love of Money. And I go through a lot more detail and practical aspects of personal finance. So we'll talk about debt tonight, but then other things like how do I do a budget? What about insurance? And a lot of other practical aspects of finance that we talk about in those seminars. So if you want to check that out, feel free at Audioverse. So tonight, I want to begin with the question we asked last night. And in case you weren't here, the question was, is being in debt a sin? And so that question, wherever I go to do this seminar, I always get a mixed response. There are always those who say yes and those who say no. And so in a way, I can understand why, right? Each side, why they feel this way. So here's a statement from Ellen White in the book Publishing Ministry, page 209. She writes, "I now write to ask you if you will let me have the use of $2,000 to help me in bringing out books that the people need. If I should fall in the conflict before the Lord's appearing, my sons would carry forward the work of circulating my books according to my plans. When the expense of issuing my books is lessened, the sales will soon pay up all my debts." So if being in debt is a sin, I find it difficult to believe that Ellen White would so openly ask to borrow money. And in fact, when she passed away, there were still some debts on her estate that were eventually paid back because of exactly what she says here from the sale of her books. So it's difficult for me to conclude that being in debt is a sin. However, the Bible does also tell us that the borrower is servant to the lender, which can also be translated slave to the lender. And in Adventist Home 393, Ellen White also writes, "Be determined never to incur another debt. Deny yourself 1,000 things rather than run in debt. This has been the curse of your life, getting into debt. Avoid it as you would the smallpox." And so here, between these two statements, we find the title for our seminar tonight, Slaves with Smallpox. This is the description we see in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy of people who are in debt. They are slaves, and it's like they have this, plague-like disease. So if we think about it carefully, is it a sin to be a slave? Well, no. Is it a sin to be sick? Is it a sin to have smallpox or to have COVID-19? No, it's not a sin to be sick. But do you want to be a slave? And do you ever want to have smallpox? Well, the answer is also no. So what am I trying to say? Debt is like having smallpox. Debt is like being in slavery. Though it is not a sin, it is still not something you want to be subject to. So what am I saying? Debt is bad, but not a sin. So this is the delicate balance we have to tread here. Just because something is bad and we don't want it may not necessarily cross the threshold into a moral sin. And some stats to bear this out, in the United States in 2016, the average household debt is $137,000. And I'm guessing, particularly with the economic downturn and the lockdowns with COVID-19, this number has probably gone up significantly. The average car loan is about almost $30,000. The average student loan is $50,000. Average credit card balances, this is all for a household, is $16,883. And again, probably higher now that COVID-19 has upended the economy. And the credit card interest per year, that the average credit card interest that's paid per year is $1,300. This is a lot of money, a lot of debt. And this is actually a snapshot into the average American lifestyle, just up to our eyeballs in debt. And I shared this stat last night too. This is from Forbes magazine. It says that 63% of Americans don't have cash to cover a $500 emergency. And as we mentioned also last night, $500, most emergencies can very easily exceed $500. And more than 56% have less than $1,000 in cash in their checking and savings account combined. And then what this means is that the majority of Americans are one paycheck away from catastrophe. And we're all aware of the economic situation that this country is in because of COVID and because of the lockdowns and because of businesses not operating in a lot of cases. There have been some people who have been out of work for months and months. And in fact, I have family members who are professionals. They work in a hospital, and they happen to have listened to my advice, and they've actually saved up and have an emergency fund. We recommend usually 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And so this family member didn't used to be that way, but they have saved up. And when they heard the news that they were going to have to be, shut down, the outpatient clinic had to be shut down where they worked, they were fine. It was actually kind of like, okay, well, it'll just be an extended vacation. And, they just spent time doing other things, ministry and hobbies and things. But then other colleagues working the exact same position in the exact same place, it was a complete meltdown for them and their families, because they realized even if they missed one paycheck, they were going to be in a lot of trouble. And this is really the way that many American lifestyles are lived nowadays, where they are just always living on the edge of the cliff, on a knife's edge of financial ruin. And COVID-19 really unmasked a lot of those vulnerabilities and the lack of resilience in the American personal financial situation. And I've heard one person say, debt is as American as apple pie. And this truly is borne out. We are a nation of slaves with smallpox. It's not a good situation to be in. And so the question now is, so if debt is not a sin, is it ever okay to be in debt? And if so, when might that be? How do we know? So I want to go back to the statement that we've been reading, and it gives us some hints. Ellen White here talks about borrowing money to print her books. And she makes it very clear that the books are revenue generating, meaning she's borrowing the money for capital to do the initial print run, but then those books will be sold and there'll be a profit that can come back to pay off the debt. And this gives us a hint as to when debt is appropriate or acceptable. Here are the rules. And there are basically two rules that are like two sides of the coin. One is never borrow money for something that only goes down in value. That's another term. Another term we use is depreciating assets. So if you borrow money to buy something that only goes down in value, that means you are overpaying, right? You're paying more than 100% of what that thing is worth. And that is just mathematically, that's not a good idea. But the second rule, which is the flip side of that, is that borrowing is acceptable only if what you're buying can eventually pay off the debt. So this is talking about either an appreciating asset, meaning the value of what you buy can go up, has the potential of going up, or it's income generating or revenue generating. So that's what happened in the case of Ellen White. She was borrowing money to purchase something that can actually pay it off later on. And so these are the rules for acceptable debt. And if you listen to the financial gurus out there in the world, they actually use the term good debt and good debt versus bad debt. And the rules I'm highlighting now is generally how they define good debt. But based on what we have read from the Spirit of Prophecy and the Bible about it being smallpox and being in slavery, it's difficult for me to call any debt good debt. But I like to call it acceptable or permissible debt. So these are the types of things that it's okay to borrow money for if you must. And so let's take a look at some of the common things that people borrow money for. Do they pass these two debt rules? Okay, so you think to yourself, looking at these four items here, and just ask yourself, do they pass the debt rules? So student loans. Are student loans an acceptable form of debt? Yes or no? Well, the answer is yes, because a student loan, the intent of a student loan is to increase or to buy an education that increases our future earning potential. It gives us the option for a higher income. So in theory, right, if you get the right degree, if you get a degree in underwater basket weaving or something, then it's probably a bad idea. But if you get a degree that can actually help you in your career and advance you in a way that increases your earning potential, then in theory, that earning potential is an appreciation of your income, and then you're able to pay off the debt. But of course, we're going to talk more about student loans in just a moment. Not all student loans are created equal, just like not all degrees are created equal. So that's why it's yes, ... Like it's not always the best choice. Now, what about a home mortgage? Is it acceptable to borrow money to buy a home? Well, the answer for that is yes. And the reason is that homes tend to be an appreciating asset. And of course, if we don't own a home, we're still gonna have to live somewhere. So presumably you would be paying rent. So the amount that you save in rent is also a savings and increase in your income. Now, what about a new iPhone? I hope this one is an easy one because an iPhone is a depreciating asset. It doesn't go up in value. So the answer is no. A new iPhone is not something that we should borrow money for. And now this last one is always the tricky one. People have a mixed response on this, but is it acceptable debt to borrow to buy a car loan? Well, my answer very consistently is no. And this is the reason why. A car is a depreciating asset. We all know the story. The moment you drive a car off the dealer's lot, it goes down in value. You're never going to sell a car for more than what you bought it for, especially once you start driving it and you add on the miles. And of course, the smart aleck always says, what about it's a classic car? Well, look, if you're into car collecting, I'm pretty sure you understand the market. It's an investment. It's different. But for those of us, our Toyota Corolla is never going to increase in value. I'm sorry to tell you, but that's just the facts. And I will say that there is a slight, I will open the door a little bit when it comes to borrowing for a car or getting a lease, for example, for a car. And that is if it is a vehicle for business purposes, like let's say you're a taxi service or you're Uber driver, there might be a business case because of the way that depreciation works in a business is different than in an individual private owner type of situation. So I will acknowledge that, but we are really focusing on personal finance, individuals, and owning a vehicle for private use, not for business use. So in that context is what I'm talking about. And in that context, I never recommend people to borrow to buy a car. And in fact, later in this presentation, we're going to talk about how to buy a car without borrowing money. So you can look forward to that in just a few minutes. But here's the point. Just because it's permissible doesn't mean you must borrow money. Okay, this is important to remember. Just because it's permissible to borrow money for a student loan doesn't mean you must. In fact, I had some friends of my family, I guess I should say, where they were going through college and they were taking out not just enough to pay for their tuition, they were taking out living loans. And they were borrowing money. They borrowed money to buy a car. They had a credit card. They were charging it up. They took out the maximum student loan that they had that they could get access to. And they took a living loan to pay for their living expenses. And I was pulling out my hair. I'm thinking, this is crazy. This is way more than you need to borrow just to get the degree. This person didn't really seem to understand that someday they're going to have to pay this thing back with interest. So just because you can doesn't mean you must. And it's always better to not have to borrow if you can, just like it's better to not have to contract COVID-19 or smallpox if you can avoid it. So along the same lines of student loans, we have to remember that student loans are not like any other kind of loan. Federal student loans cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. It's one of those loans that even if you file for bankruptcy, you're still on the hook for it. And so it's gonna follow you your whole life. And there's actually a joke. It's actually not a joke because it's actually the truth, is that for federal student loans, there are two ways to get out of federal student loans. The first is to pay it off, and the second is to die. And I think I know which of the two I prefer, and it's not the second. And in the case of student loans, the government, in Uncle Sam's magnanimous, type of a spirit, they can even garnish your tax returns. I've heard stories of, a young person coming out of school, just bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to get to work, and they're filing their taxes, and they're like, wow, I'm gonna get this nice tax refund. And then when the time comes, they get a little note. Uncle Sam says, oh, to be convenient to you, we have just applied your tax refund towards your student loans. Thanks, but you're not going to get a penny. So those kinds of things can happen when you borrow money from Uncle Sam. And so just because you qualify, you shouldn't take the maximum amount because it's not free money. You're going to have to pay it back. So student loans, you must be very careful. Very careful. Only borrow what you need. Don't borrow any more, and do your absolute utmost to not need to borrow to begin with. In fact, this is counsel from Ellen White in the book Education, page 221. She says, in acquiring an education, many students would gain a most valuable training if they would become self-sustaining instead of incurring debts or depending on the self-denial of their parents. Let young men and young women depend on themselves. So Ellen White actually has something to say about student loans. She says, if you can help it, don't get into debt for your education. Continuing, same paragraph. They, meaning the student, will thus learn the value of money, the value of time, strength, and opportunities, and will be under far less temptation to indulge idle and spendthrift habits. The lessons of economy, industry, self-denial, practical business management, and steadfastness of purpose, thus mastered, would prove a most important part of their equipment for the battle of life. So Ellen White says you should work. You should work your way through school, or at least as much as you can, so you don't have to borrow as much. Because what she's saying here is the lessons of how to work and how to manage your money and understanding where the money comes from, might even be more important than the actual education or the degree that we're earning itself. A lot of times it's one of the syndromes that happen is that children that get sent away to college, they have a certain standard of living that they have been accustomed to at home. And mom and dad feel like it is their obligation to continue to sustain and subsidize the same standard of living while junior is away at college. And so they buy a nice car, a new car. They pay for all the fancy stuff in the dorms and new computers and all the clothes, and just study, be a good boy, and don't worry about working, just get a good grades. But the problem is when junior graduates from college, he's never learned how to work. And he never realized that how much money it actually took to sustain this lifestyle that he's been accustomed to. And so when he comes out of school, he is on his own, and his first job doesn't earn nearly as much as what mom and dad made. And so they feel like they deserve a certain lifestyle that they have been accustomed to. And so they charge up the credit card, they borrow money, they feel like this is a minimum standard of living that they are entitled to. But if they had just learned while in school, when mom and dad might have still been able to help them a little bit, how to work and how much things cost and how difficult it is sometimes to actually maintain a certain standard of living, they'll be much better off to fend for themselves when they get out in the real world. So at this point, since we're talking about student loans, I want to tell you a little bit about my own story, give you an example of what I did. So I mentioned yesterday that for my undergraduate degree, I went to Washita Hills College. That's where Jared and Sarah and David and Rebecca, a number of you at this church, that's where I met them. And we were students and students together, classmates. And my parents paid for that education, but we still had to work on campus. And so it kept our tuition quite a bit lower because of that. Now, once I got out of undergrad, I pursued a master's degree. And this was right at the time, right after I got married to my wife. And so the story begins actually the summer before our wedding. This was in 2010. So there was a general conference session going on in Atlanta, and I had registered to the business program, graduate program at Southern Adventist University in Collegedale, which is close to Atlanta where the GC session was to be held. So my fiance at the time, my wife-to-be, we were driving through Collegedale on our way to the GC session, and I decided to stop by Southern to turn in my paperwork to get enrolled for the winter semester. So I walk into the business office, and as I was talking to my advisor, an elderly gentleman shouted at us from across the office, and he came running over to us and said, "Hey, you. And he came over, he was, he had this excited look on his face, and he said, "Were you driving in a white Honda Accord southbound on I-75 yesterday with, a license plate frame that said Loma Linda on it?" And I thought to myself, who is this person? And because of course it was us, we were on the freeway exactly at the right place, the right time, exactly what he was saying. It was our car. And this gentleman, turns out he was the dean of the School of Business. And he looked at me and he said, "We were driving alongside you yesterday, my wife and I, and we noticed your license plate frame, and it said Loma Linda, and where you were driving, and we looked at you and your fiance, and my wife and I said, those look like Adventist young people heading to the GC." So something about us made them think they look like Adventists. Well, my license plate frame said Loma Linda, so what are the chances? And so somehow that made an impression on him, and he remembered us. We had a little chit chat. It was nice to meet him, and he was excited to have me join the program in a few months. So we left that office that day in that summer thinking to ourselves, this was a divine appointment. We don't know what's going to come of it, but it felt like a divine appointment. Fast forward, January semester has begun. I have been enrolled. I'm sitting at my desk working on a homework. The first week of school has begun, but we have not yet rented a place because my wife was looking for a job. I was looking for a job, and we didn't know how much money we were going to have because we had made a commitment to ourselves. We would not borrow money for my master's program if we could help it. And we prayed, and it's been a week and nothing was turning out. And some friends just graciously let us stay in their basement until we could get things figured out. And then in the middle of that cold, damp basement, I got an email from guess who? The dean of the School of Business. And he wrote very short, one-line email, said, "Have you found work?" I responded to him immediately, and he said, "Okay, come on in. Come on into my office. I want to talk to you." So long story short, there was a brand new graduate assistantship position that was opened for the School of Business. And I was the first name that came to his mind to fill that position. Now, why do you suppose he remembered me? It was because of that divine appointment way back in the summer of the previous year before the general conference session. And so I didn't even care what the job was. I just accepted right there on the spot. And this position allowed me to work my entire way through my business school degree. And there was some sacrifice involved. I had to work through most of my vacations. I didn't have as much of a break as some of my other classmates. All through the summer, I studied and I worked, on all the vacations. And then I could not take the maximum load. I had to slow down, and it extended my program a little bit longer. But at the end of the day, because I made the commitment to the Lord that I was going to do my best not to borrow, I believe God was able to bless me by giving me the work to actually pay my way through school, or work my way through school. And of course, studying and working, that took a little extra effort. But in the end, just like what Ellen White said here, it is worth it. The education of actually working has proven to be more, in some ways, more beneficial than just getting the degree itself. So student loans, don't borrow what you don't need, and try to work your way through school. And also, I think I should mention, really ask yourself whether a college degree is necessary. For a lot of positions and a lot of careers nowadays, a degree may not even be required. There might be other ways to gain the training that is necessary to accomplish the same work. So we're going to move on now from student loans. Let's talk about the car, because this is always a big question. People have, gnashed at me with their teeth whenever I tell them don't borrow money for a car, because they get offended by that. So let's talk about how we can actually do this, okay, without necessarily killing ourselves. So buying a car without a loan, let's begin with the average car payment in the United States. Okay, so let's start here with some hard numbers. The average car payment in the United States today is $500 per month for 68 months, which totals about $34,000. That makes sense. The most vehicles are somewhere around that range, in the upper 20,000s to 30,000 range, and then also with interest and so forth. So here's the secret: how to buy a car without a loan. The secret is really not a secret. It's just this understanding and acknowledging this fact. The fact is that once people walk onto the dealer show floor, and they sign on the dotted line to purchase a car with car payments, somehow they are able to make the car payments after they buy the car, right? Or else people won't be able to buy a car, and they'll lose their vehicle. So if we are able to afford to make the payment after we make the purchase, necessarily then we must also be able to afford it before we buy the car. You understand what I'm saying? So we signed the dotted line and we paid $500 a month for 68 months, $34,000, and we buy a car. Well, what if we just flip that script around and we say we pay ourselves the $500 for 68 months before we go into the car dealership to buy the car? Well, it's actually a little simpler than that. Here are the 4 steps: how to buy a car without a loan. Number 1, drive a cheap temporary car. And this is the hardest step, but we'll explain in just a moment. But the key word here is temporary. Okay, that's the secret of all of this. Temporary. Number 2, then you pay yourself the car payment, or another way to say it is save up. So instead of paying the car company or the bank $500 a month, you just pay yourself and sock it away in a savings account somewhere. Step 3, you use the amount that you saved plus the equity of the temporary car, right? Because you can sell that car then. And then you upgrade to a newer car in cash. And step 4 is you repeat these steps as needed. So let me give you some hard numbers here. So number 1, first step is to buy a $2,000 temporary car. And for most people, we already have a car and we might be in debt for a car. So some people, the best plan, if you are severely in debt, is to sell the car, assuming you're not underwater, okay? And there's still some value left in the car. And you take a small amount, maybe $2,000, buy a cheap car, temporary car, and then the remaining equity that you got out of that car, you can apply to paying off your other debts. But I'll be honest with you, $2,000 is still a lot of car. I know different people view things differently. And everywhere I give this seminar, some people think $2,000 is so expensive for a car, whereas other people think $2,000 is like a hunk of junk. Well, I'm here to tell you, $2,000, if you are a careful shopper, can get you a very safe, very reliable vehicle. In fact, I had a vehicle, my wife and I, we drive a minivan now, but we had a Honda Accord before. And when we sold it for around $2,000. And that car was still immaculate. It was in great condition. It just happened to be old, but it still ran like a charm and had reasonable mileage on it. It was well taken care of. And so $2,000, if you really want to, you can go down to $1,500, $1,000, and you can probably still manage to get a decent vehicle. So that's the step 1. And this is the most difficult one because we have to put aside our self-entitlement to drive a certain kind of status car, right? We have to be willing to put ourselves to one side. And then the second step is while we're driving this temporary car, and I'll mention for some people, they may not even need a car, right? Depending on where you live, if there's public transport or if you can ride a bike to work or you can carpool, you may not even need a car depending on where you live. But I'm assuming most people in America probably will need a car. So step 2, you save the $500 per month for 12 months. And I'm using $500 just because that's the average car payment in the United States today. And after 12 months, you have $6,000 in cash saved up, plus a $2,000 car. So you sell the temporary car and then you upgrade to a $7,000 or $8,000 car. I say $7,000 to $8,000 because perhaps a $2,000 vehicle, you might have lost some value on it. But that's the beauty of a cheaper car. They don't depreciate as much. It is conceivable that you can, buy a car for $2,000 and a year from now, sell it for $2,000. Like when the car is already down to that price point, that is possible. So in a matter of 12 months, you've gone from a $2,000 car to an $8,000 car. That's quite a leap. So you just continue doing that for another 12 months, save another $500 for 12 months. That's another $6,000. Now you sell the $7,000 or $8,000 car and you upgrade to a car that might be in the $12,000 to $14,000 range. And all of a sudden, in 2 years, you've gone from a $2,000 car to a $12,000 to $14,000 car, right? And you never took out a penny in debt. What it took was a little bit of self-control and a little bit of willingness to live with something less than ideal for a while. So this is one option. And then you can continue for a third year. And then you're up to, somewhere in the $20,000 range or close to it, which is almost enough to buy some cars new even. But there's another way to look at this. And that is you start off with a $2,000 temporary car and you save the $500 per month for the full 68 months. Okay. That is the average length of a car loan. So that's $34,000 you have in the bank. And once you have that much cash, you can sell your temporary car and upgrade to an entire fleet of vehicles, right? $34,000. Let me just be honest. You can buy a lot, right? Of good, decent, good condition vehicles with that kind of money. Or of course, you can spend that money and buy a brand new car. Even though personally, I don't recommend people to buy brand new cars, but you can buy, a lightly used car that has low mileage, but has some of the depreciation knocked off of it. So obviously there's still room for taste, right? And your personal preferences as well. But the technique here remains the same. There is a possibility here. And ultimately the secret is If you're able to somehow scrounge up $500 per month or your car payment after the fact, why not just plan ahead and pay yourself that amount first to save you having to pay the interest on the other end? So buying a car is a depreciating asset. Purchase one as you would a tool that will never increase in value. Okay. Just like you would never borrow money to buy a blender or to buy, a pair of pliers, right? At least I hope you wouldn't. Or a toaster oven. Those things always go down in value. So a car is the same thing. It is a tool. It's a machine that ultimately wears out. And so never borrow money to buy, to buy a car. And my second rule is it's not as hard and fast as it once was, but I highly recommend people to buy a lightly used vehicle. And if you know how to fix your own cars, even better, you can maintain your vehicle yourself. So buying a car, that's the secret. All right. So what about if we are already in debt? How do we pay off debt? So here are the steps, right? Number one, we need to own the debt. We don't want to make excuses and we shouldn't play the victim. If we are in debt, we're in debt. It's true. Maybe we were 18 years old and we signed up for that credit card on the college campus, or we got a student loan before we knew any better. Guess what? We are still responsible for paying it off. So let's put on our big boy pants. Don't need to cry, over, things that happened in the past. We need to seize the moment and take responsibility for it. And there is no alternative to making big payments. So the secret to paying off debt is that you're going to have to pay it off, right? There's no way around it. And even though people talk about debt forgiveness and there's all these sophisticated things, there's always a catch. There's always a catch with every type of policy like that. And so there is no alternative. You're going to have to pay. And sometimes you might be able to negotiate with creditors, but that will never eliminate the debt. It might reduce it or lower the interest rate. And so sometimes that is worthwhile to pursue, depending on what you're dealing with. But you just have to make up your mind that you are going to pay it off. And step number 3, we must make debt payoff the number one priority in our short-term savings plan. And then we need to squeeze every dime out of our monthly spending plan or our budget to apply towards that. So it has to be a priority. And people always ask, is there some investment, some secret investment that will help me pay off my debt? No, the answer is no. There is no such thing. Don't worry about investing until your debt is paid off. Your debt is your best investment. Paying off debt is always the best investment. And you should use the debt snowball method to pay off your debt. And this is how the debt snowball works. You list your debts from smallest to largest balance is what I mean. And you pay minimums on all the debt except the smallest. And you focus your intense effort to pay off the smallest debt first. And then you roll all of the extra payments onto the next one. So you're focusing on one debt at a time, in other words, from the smallest to largest based on balance. So here's an example of a debt snowball. This person has 2 credit cards, $1,000 balance, $2,500 balance, a car loan for $10,000, and a student loan for $25,000. So it's listed now from in ascending order of balance. The smallest debt is $1,000 up to $25,000. So it's $38,500 total. And if this person right now has $1,000 per month to apply towards the debt, you notice immediately after the first month, they're able to pay off the first credit card in the debt snowball. And she's paying the minimum on the other ones. And then if after the first month, she can scratch the first credit card off the list. She's done with that forever. 3 months later, or 2.5 months later, she will have paid off the second credit card. So 2 things are done. So it will feel like she's halfway done, even though numerically she's not exactly. But in a matter of 3.25 years, in going down this debt snowball method, she would have paid everything off. And this is even assuming not having any extra income surplus coming in. So the debt snowball is helpful because it keeps psychological motivation. And this is where a lot of people often ask, isn't it mathematically more beneficial to pay off debt in the order of highest to lowest interest rate? And the answer is yes, you will save more money. But a lot of times it may create roadblocks from people being able to stay motivated, because you might get stuck on this really big debt that might have a higher interest rate. But these little ones are just hanging around and you feel like you're not making any progress. And so knocking out the small ones in a quick fashion helps to keep the psychological motivation up, and the small wins will help people stick with it. And so I recommend people to go with the debt snowball method for that reason. But the reality is, if you have the self-discipline and you're able to pay it off using the highest interest rate to lowest interest rate method, more power to you, as long as you're able to maintain the discipline to do it. As you know, at the end of the day, like I said, paying off debt simply means you're going to have to pay big payments and to pay it off with discipline. Paying off debt is the best investment. If you regret being debt-free, it's easy to undo it. This is what I always tell people. People often think, oh, I don't know if I can live without debt. I say, why don't you just give it a try? If you don't like being debt-free, that's fine. You can always go back into debt very easily, but just give it a try. And I don't know of anybody who wishes that they weren't debt-free. Let's put it that way. Everyone is always happy to get out of debt. So talking about debt, we would have to talk about credit cards. So let's deal with credit cards real quick. Credit cards, number one, are not dangerous. They're pieces of plastic, and now they're not even plastic. They can be on your phone and things like that. The problem is that credit card use without self-control is dangerous, right? It's the love of money that's the root of all evil, not the money itself. And so credit cards can get demonized for being very bad, but it's really the person holding the credit card that's the bigger problem. And so I do need to make clear that it is possible to live without credit cards. And I think some people are better off living without credit cards. And you know, whenever we talk about credit cards, people often think about Dave Ramsey. He is the credit card czar. He is very consistent about being anti-credit cards. And I think he's done a lot of good to help people overcome their addiction to credit, easy credit. But I will also balance it out where I don't agree with him entirely. That is that credit cards do have benefits. And I believe that credit cards are useful and are appropriate as long as the credit card holder exercises self-control. So what is the proper way to use credit cards? Okay, this is how you determine whether you have the disposition and credit card or the self-control to do it. Don't use credit cards to buy stuff you don't need, right? This is fundamentally personal finance. Never buy stuff you don't need. You need to have a budget to control your spending, and then never carry a balance from month to month. Always pay off your credit card every month. If you violate either of these two rules, then it is evidence that you don't have the necessary self-control. And so you ought to cut up your credit card, do the plastic surgery like Dave Ramsey says, and live without the credit cards. And you can use a debit card or use cash. However, if you do continue to use credit cards, I recommend that people consolidate credit cards and not have so many of them so that you can concentrate the rewards of your credit card. The credit card industry is very smart, and it's one of those things that we have to just recognize. We're not going to outsmart them. So we need to stay within the rules and use credit cards wisely. So some of the benefits of credit cards are the travel points, the cash back, rewards, rebates, things of that nature. But a lot of times there are minimum thresholds on different cards before you get to cash out those benefits. And so if we've got cards, you know, maybe we have a gas card, and then we have a Costco card, and then we have an Amazon card, and then we have a cash back card, and then we have a travel card. And we've got like a half a dozen cards, but all of them have just small amounts of credit on all of them and not enough to actually pool them together or to cash them out. Then that is a terrible waste of these cards, especially if, you know, if you have to pay an annual fee, especially. And so we have to be mindful of that. And I generally recommend people to have as few cards as necessary, so you can consolidate them and make sure you don't forget to pay one off and all those kinds of things. Simplicity is the name of the game. And you know, some of the benefits of credit cards also are like extended warranties and car rental insurance and you know, free car rentals in the case of an accident. There are all sorts of things that the credit card does offer that can be a benefit. So credit card usage, I am not like, I don't go as far as Dave Ramsey, but I do recommend people to really be honest with themselves as to whether or not they have the self-control to do it. Okay, so enough about credit cards. Let's talk about housing. This is, we're gonna talk about housing, and that should take us to the end of our time presentation here. And so let me tell you the story of how we bought our house. I mentioned yesterday, my wife and I, we bought our house. Here's a picture of it. Early on, I think the first week that we were living here. And how do we pay it off in 2 years? So the numbers. Our home was $185,000. We live in Southeast Tennessee. And our mortgage was $85,000. And oh yeah, we have a house, $185,000. Our house is about 1,400 square feet. It's not real big, but we do have a guest house, which is where I am right now. This is where the Audioverse office is. And it's on a 1 acre piece of property here in the country. So 1 acre, 2 buildings, 1,400 square feet in one, about 900 square feet in the other. So that's what we got for that purchase price. We got a 15-year fixed rate mortgage at 3.49% interest. And so with those numbers, our monthly minimum payments were right at $607.24. But we averaged $3,700 in monthly payments over the term, the 2 years that we paid this mortgage off. And we had a $100,000 down payment. So everybody always asks, what is the secret to paying off your house in 2 years? Well, the secret are these last 2 lines at the bottom of the screen. And and then the next question is, well, how do you do that? Well, the big down payment is all because of my wife. My wife had a dream to buy her first house in cash since she was a little girl, and she had been saving up ever since her first job out of college. So she is a prolific saver of money. And I like to tell people she's the best financial decision I've ever made. Marrying her was the best financial decisions ever, because she can save money like nobody's business. And she's been saving money. She was a nurse coming out of school. I mean, she saved money like a crazy person because she had this dream, right? So she just made it her goal, and she just saved up for a long time. So I can't take any credit for that. But then the big monthly payments came in because nearly all of our extra payments went toward the mortgage, and we averaged 6 times the minimum. So this was before our first child was born. And so we had 2 incomes coming in, and we managed our lifestyle where we lived on 1 income, and the entire second income, and more actually, more than that, but all of it went towards the home mortgage. And we did the math, and we realized at that rate, we could pay off the house in 2 years. And we knew we wanted to have children and start a family. So we realized that was what we wanted to do. So that's our story. And it's all about the savings rate. You see, so the secret is saving for a big down payment, and then being able to squeeze enough money out of our monthly budget to have extra to apply towards the mortgage. It's all about the savings rate. It's not some secret investment. It's not some secret, trick we had with the bank or anything of that nature. It's just having big, hairy, chunky payments on a month-to-month basis. And I will mention that this may not be the right path for everyone, right? They're based on your particular situation, what stage you are in life, what other debts you have, what your income is, how much down payment you have saved, what kind of house you're talking about. I mean, there are a lot of variables that could affect the best path forward. But for us, this happened to be what worked for us. So the benefit of paying off the house, because some people say, you shouldn't pay off the house. A house is, a tax write-off, the mortgage interest and all this kind of stuff. Well, that's kind of a myth. It's like paying Uncle Sam $1 in order for him to give us 25 cents back. That's not good math as far as a tax write-off goes. But what are the benefits? So the benefit is we get to live rent and mortgage free, which eliminates the single largest expense in our budget. You see, this issue, the reason for us taking this path is a cash flow consideration. We knew that just like most Americans, our living expense or our housing expense, meaning either rent or mortgage, would be the single largest line item in our monthly budget. So if we could eliminate that line item from our budget, instantly the needs, the cash flow needs on a month-to-month basis has significantly reduced. So we can live on less on an ongoing basis. And we knew that we wanted to have children, and we knew that we wanted my wife to be a stay-at-home mom. And so we knew we had to somehow adjust our cash flow needs to not need as much income on a month-to-month basis so that mom can stay home with the baby. And so this is the big reason why we paid off the house in 2 years, to eliminate this big line item in our budget to free up our cash flow. Another reason, another benefit is that we own our home now. So instead of the bank owning it, there's no risk of foreclosure. The bank can't come and tell us, oh, this house doesn't belong to you anymore because you missed your payment. And we also freed up cash for other savings and other types of investments. And one of the things we invested on our property were solar panels. And so because we were able to pay off the house, it saved the cash, and we had extra cash flow, we were able to put solar panels on the house, and we actually get paid on a net basis from our electric company. So we have no electric bill, and we actually build up a credit from our electric company. So it even further reduces our monthly budget and cash flow as well. And so we paid off the mortgage the same month our baby was born, which meant that was exactly the time my wife was ready and able to stay home. And she hasn't gone back to work ever since. And it's been 5 years now. And of course, not having a mortgage is one less thing to stress about because the borrower is always servant to the lender. And so these are some pictures. This is our picture of our backyard right when we moved in. And I know, showing a picture of snow in Tennessee to a group of people living in Minnesota is not real, not very impressive, I know. But for a lot of our people, a lot of the people I showed this picture to, it is quite impressive to them, particularly in the tropics. So this is our property, and the one acre here behind our house, and the little guest house here on the left-hand side is the Audioverse World Headquarters. And that's where I am right now, in fact, presenting this message. So the other benefit is that we saved a lot of interest. Okay, so this is one of the big things that we gained from paying off the mortgage so quickly. In a 15-year mortgage, if we had just gone and paid the minimum, here in the left-hand column, you see $85,000 mortgage, our monthly payment is $607. We would have paid $24,300 in interest, okay? But because we paid it off in 2 years, the total interest that we paid was only $3,344.85. So the amount of interest that we saved was just under $21,000. And this is the hidden cost that people usually don't feel when they are in debt. And a mortgage just happens to be probably the biggest type of debt that anybody gets into. The interest is part of the monthly payment, and we don't see it. We just see the monthly payment, $600 or whatever, going out every month. But if we just say, bam, pay $24,000 in interest, we would get sticker shock, and we would realize how expensive it is to borrow money. So for us doing this math, it is remarkable to see, okay, we actually saved $21,000. And incidentally, our minivan that we purchased a few years ago was, after tax and everything, was right under $18,000. So in other words, the amount that we saved in interest more than paid for the vehicle, and it was a used vehicle, the minivan that we bought for the family. So when you put those type of comparisons, you can see what a significant difference it makes. So let's talk a little bit more practical here about getting the dream house. So we talked about how we bought our home, but let's look at a scenario that I think many Adventists are considering nowadays, and that is moving out to the country. So let's just suppose our dream home is a $300,000 house out in the country. What's the best way to purchase that property? And this applies to really buying any home. It doesn't have to be out in the country, but I've just been getting a lot of questions recently about people wanting to move out into the country, which is a great thing. Ellen White recommends it, but this is a big purchase, and a lot of people have never purchased before, and they don't know how to go about it. And so there are questions. So The question is it better to get a small house first and pay it off early? Or is it better to go straight for the bigger house if I can afford the payments? Okay, so this is the two approaches. And to illustrate this, I want to introduce you to the fictional families of the Bigs and the Smalls. And the Bigs are the family that goes straight for buying the big house. And the Smalls are the ones that work their way up. They buy a small house first, and then they're going to move up to the big house. So the Bigs, they have a $300,000 property that they want to purchase, and they have a $30,000 down payment. That's 10%. And so the balance that they have, the Bigs have, is $270,000 on their mortgage. They have a 30-year mortgage at 4.5% interest. This example is a few years ago. Interest rates, I think, are quite a bit lower than that now. Their monthly payments is about $1,300. And over the first decade, 10 years, they will pay $164,166. All right. In the right-hand column, you will see the Smalls. They are buying a $150,000 home, and they are putting down $30,000 as well. So they have the same amount of down payment. So the amount they have remaining in their balance is $120,000. They also have a 4.5% mortgage, but they're going to pay it off in 10 years. And so the amount they pay monthly to pay it off in 10 years is $1,243.66. And over 10 years, they pay a little bit under $150,000. And this is not including their down payment. And so after the first decade, you have to remember that the Smalls family, they've paid off their small house entirely. All right. So we move to the second decade now. The second decade, notice the Bigs, they're still living in the same house and they're still paying it off at 4.5% at the exact same monthly payment. And they pay the same amount the second 10 years. But the Smalls now, they sell their $150,000 home and they move up now to the $300,000 home that they wanted to begin with. And so they have a $150,000 balance remaining. So they have a second mortgage now for $150,000, and they again pay it off in 10 years with a 4.5% interest mortgage. So the second 10 years, they're paying $1,554.58 per month, and their second 10 years total is $186,549. But remember, after the end of the second decade, the Smalls have paid off their house completely. Okay, so now we have to move to the third decade because the Bigs are on a 30-year mortgage. So the third decade, they continue to pay the exact same amount month after month. And the total amount after 3 decades, 30 years for a $300,000 house, okay? The Bigs have paid $522,498. So you think 4.5% interest, oh, that doesn't sound so much? Well, look how much it cost them, right? 522. So you just subtract 300,000. That's $222,500 just in interest. But the Smalls, notice carefully, the total amount they paid, because they didn't notice, they didn't have any payments in the third decade. They paid $365,788 total. So in total, for the second house, essentially, they paid $65,000 roughly in interest. But notice, the amount that they saved compared to the Bigs is over $150,000. And you remember the very first house they bought was only $150,000. So they saved more than what the first house cost them when they first bought it. So this is remarkable. Okay, so let's take a look at what we just learned here using this example. Both families ended up in their dream home, which happens to be equivalent using our example. But the Smalls ended up paying off their dream home a full 10 years before the Bigs. And the Smalls' mortgage payments was lower for the first 10 years. It was higher for the second 10 years, but they had no payment at all in their third 10 years. All right. And the Smalls saved enough money in total that they could have gone back and bought their first house back in cash with the surplus that they saved. Now that's remarkable. So by buying smart, the Smalls can own 2 houses and have them both paid off 10 years before the bigs finish paying off their first house. That's remarkable. So what does this show us? If we're thinking about buying a house, it's important for us to buy smart and don't let it become a nightmare. Okay. And sometimes patience pays off. Okay. So having a big down payment, being able to pay extra payments will also help in that process. But to be willing to live with a smaller house first before moving up to the big house. And this, I'll end with this verse. We read this last night, 1 Timothy 6, verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. This really is the bottom line that we need to understand when we think about debt. A lot of times debt is driven merely by a discontented spirit. We must have something now. We must have something that measures up to all of our friends. We must have something that, gives me the status and the image that I want. But if we're able to temper that side of our human nature and have some self-control and have some patience and delayed gratification, then just like what we read here, it can be great gain. Okay. So some examples, right? Credit cards. We talked about credit cards. Godliness with contentment is great gain. If we're able to be content with what we have and not have to charge things to the credit card, but be willing to be patient to save up for it until later, it's great gain for us. If we're willing to drive a less than optimum vehicle while we save up to upgrade to a nicer vehicle later, for a short time, that level of contentment with our status can be great gain. And if we're willing to be patient in terms of buying a house and not get the one with the fancy pillars and the big yard and the huge shop and the marble or granite countertops, and move up, right? Not to say that we can't have the nice things in life, but to have contentment now while we save up for something like that, it can be great gain for us. So that is the spirit that we ought to remember as we deal with debt. We don't want to be slaves with smallpox. All right. So that takes us to the end of our presentation here. So I will stop my screen share and I'll close with prayer at this time, but then I will hand it over to David for a few instructions as we transition into the question and answer session right after this. So let's bow our heads for prayer as we conclude this portion of our meeting now. Father in heaven, we thank you that you care about even the nuts and bolts, the dollars and cents in our lives, to have given us counsel and advice and wisdom and as far as how to manage debt. Lord, we know that it is not ideal to be in debt. You do not wish for us to be slaves to any man, but yet, Lord, sometimes we know it is necessary in this world. And so we pray you will give us wisdom as far as how to manage our debt, how to get out of debt, how to minimize debt, and to wisely handle the means in our disposal. So I pray, Lord, you will guide us in the time we have together now. May we be able to answer some questions. May you give us wisdom and guide us in the coming week as well. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, David, maybe you can give us some instructions on how to proceed.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Alistair. Just a moment. I apologize. I had some echoing microphone here. So how we're going to do these questions, if everyone can look down on the bottom of their screen or on their phone, you'll probably notice there's a spot where you can raise your hand. And so I want to keep it so not everyone's trying to talk at once, and one person can ask the question, then Alistair can answer, and then we'll acknowledge the next person. So if you have a question, please raise your hand in the with the little digital raising your hand button, and then I'll acknowledge you, and you can go ahead and unmute your mic and ask your question, and then I'll answer it. If you're not able to do that or to raise your hand, or you would like to type a question in the chat function, you can do that as well, and then I will read your question for Al and the rest of the participants to answer. So at this time, we can open the floor. Who would like to raise their hand first and ask a question? So did FIP have a question?
Nobody.
Yes.
Go ahead.
This is a great presentation. I'm wondering if the slides are available.
I'm sorry, I was muted there. They are available, but what I can do, they are available, but not in the exact form. So what I can do is all my slides, I will email them to David and Jared, and they can make that available to you to review afterwards.
Thank you. Does someone else have a question they would like to ask? Please raise your hand or acknowledge, so we can acknowledge you and you can go ahead and ask the question.
I think I see a hand here from
Yes,
Orion.
yes, Orion, go ahead.
Okay, can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, you can.
Okay, good. Thank you for the presentation, but I have a quick question. Are you saying that it's best to pay off like student loans and a house before investing?
Okay, good clarification. For investing, the most debt should be paid off before investing. And I think student loans would fall under that category. The only exception I generally give is the home mortgage. And of course, one of the reasons for that is because the home mortgage interest rate tends to be lower. And also because a home mortgage is such a large purchase that it takes so long that investing may not be able to be put off for that long. So general rule of thumb, all other debts, pay them off first before you really get serious into investing. But the home mortgage is the one exception.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Who else has a question? Oh, yeah.
I want to also request for this presentation to be made available so we can share with some children who are not here.
Yes, David has been recording these, so he will make them available for you afterwards. And I will also send him my slides so you can get those as well.
I will be posting them on our church website under media, and maybe posting them on our The Way YouTube channel, but for sure on our website, we will have the videos and presentations available here in the next couple days. It's thewaysda.org. Okay, I think we had another question. Guantua, would you like to go ahead?
Oh, yes, I have two questions. The first question is, yesterday you said you were going to talk a little bit about stock investment and Adventism and stuff. I don't know if I missed it, but I would appreciate if you touch about it a little bit, just because of that whole gambling and all that stuff. That's my first question. My second question is on afternoon presentation when you talked about tithe and offering. And I was just wondering if the way the money is allocated and all that stuff being part of the whole structure of the church. And I was wondering if the church does do review to see if the system works.
Yes. Okay. So the first question about stock investing, I'm actually not covering that in our seminar here. But if you go to Audioverse, there is a seminar where I talk about it, and it is
if
called.
I go where? I didn't get it.
If you go on audioverse.org, that's the website where most of my presentations are archived. And just look up my name, and also the seminar is called Trading the Talents, and from GYC. And I spent an entire hour talking about investing, biblical principles of investing, how to determine whether an investment is appropriate or not. Thank you. And yes, someone just posted the URL in the chat box, and it is addressed in detail, not just stocks, but all forms of investings, but stocks are definitely featured heavily there and the principles behind it. So that's the first principle. So you didn't miss it here in our session this weekend. I didn't talk about it. But the other question about the tithe, yes, the answer is the church does regularly audit and review how the tithe is allocated and what it is used for. It's actually a fairly significant portion of what the church does. So I think we can have confidence. I mean, we're not going to know every single dollar, right? But as far as how the money is distributed within the structure, and then within each level of the church structure, there definitely is careful audit and evaluation there.
Very good. Any other questions?
There
There
are some questions in the chat.
Yes, that's what I was going to mention.
Go ahead.
So, all right, I'll just work my way through the chat here a little bit. There have been a few that got added. So the first question is, what does the Bible or Spirit of Prophecy say about life insurance? So life insurance is definitely mentioned in the Spirit of Prophecy. So before that, I actually have a presentation on Audioverse as well, where I deal with insurance in general. And it's on life insurance is a part of that. And that is from the GYC 2017 session. I think it's called Give a Portion to Seven, something to that effect. David, you might be able to find it. But a quick summary is that Ellen White does, and people are familiar with this passage, you can look it up, but Ellen White talks negatively about life insurance. She mentions how it is like investing, or it is like gambling, and it's speculation rather. And so a lot of people have taken that to interpreted that to mean life insurance is not appropriate under any circumstance. Now, the issue here is that life insurance in her day is not what life insurance today is. And this is important to make a distinction, because there are a lot of things, historically speaking, like, she used to talk about bikes, riding bicycles as a problem. There was a historical reason for why she said those things. Life insurance is similar. And so if you want a more detailed analysis, the Adventist Biblical Research Institute did a study on Ellen White and life insurance. And you can find it at their website, the Adventist Biblical Research website. And it is a paper called, I think, Ellen White and Life Insurance, or something like that, where they evaluate her statements and also all of her counsel regarding the need for providing for the family and in time of need. And the conclusion is the same conclusion I share. The conclusion of that paper is the same conclusion I share. And that is that there are appropriate uses for life insurance. And it is in harmony with the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy principles. But you just have to be mindful that not all life insurance policies are created equal. So my general recommendation is for people who need it. Not everyone needs life insurance. Life insurance is primarily needed if you have dependents who are who's dependent on your income. So the insurance just replaces your income if you were to pass away. In a situation like that, a simple term life insurance is all you need. So whole life insurance, cash value life insurance, universal, variable, all these different types of life insurance where they try to mix it with an investment product. For most people, it is safe to disregard those. And I think the regular term life insurance is in fact in keeping with the principle of taking care of your loved ones, providing for them in case of an emergency and things of that nature. So if you want more information, again, those two resources is the seminar on Audioverse. I think David has added it here. And then also he added the link to the Adventist Biblical Research Institute, Seventh-day Adventists and Life Insurance. That's the name of the article. So that's a great question. I get that one a lot. The next question is, oh yeah, we answered this one already. If I missed a previous session, can I get the recording or the notes? Yes, we will be posting those. Okay, the next question, how often should we give to the poor or help those in need when you are paying off your debts? Are you consistently paying your tithe and offerings. So as far as myself goes, I do return my tithe and offerings on a regular basis. I have it on my calendar. It's a reminder on my phone. It pops up whenever the day of the month is that the payment, my income comes in. I have a spreadsheet. I keep a budget, and the exact amount I pay online now because church is still closed in many places. So yes, absolutely. And then the question is, how often should we give to help those in need when we are paying off our debts? Well, as I mentioned in our afternoon presentation, God comes first. So our tithes and offerings come before paying off the debt. So our debt payments are going to come out of the money that is remaining after we return our tithe and our offerings. And the percentage that I recommend, I shouldn't say I recommend, the percentage that we read from the Spirit of Prophecy as far as the 25% goes, that is going to be something between you and the Lord and your family, if you have a family, to consider how much of that you're able to do considering your debt load. And this is going to be a very personal type of situation, depending on your particular scenario, how much you're able to squeeze out of your budget and where you are on the journey. But that is an aspirational goal, and it could be something that you work up to, certainly. But I would not necessarily feel it my burden to encourage people to give money away beyond the 25%, right? Or the tithe and the offerings, if you are still dealing with your debt load. So if you have a lot of debt, return to the Lord what he requires, but don't feel pressured to just give more and more and more and more, because like somehow giving away money to God is somehow like, remediating the debt over here, because that's not necessarily the case. So all things in balance, you're going to have to make that decision based on your personal financial situation. All right. So last question down at the bottom here in the chat box. What are some strategies to practice
we
as...
lost Al here.
Whoops.
For a second.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? David, can you hear me? I think we might have lost David, but I think, can the group hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, so I think David is, he's having connection issues. So the question is,
I'm back, but go ahead.
Okay, all right, no problem. So what are some strategies to practice as preparing for retirement? This is a very big question. In fact, there are entire financial planning industries built around this one question. So it is impossible to give you a full answer because it is very much an individualized situation. But some general principles as far as preparing for retirement. Number one is start right away. I mentioned in our presentation, I think it was last night, that compounding interest, the secret ingredient for it to work is time. So you can't go back in time. So the only way you can maximize your time is to start as soon as you can. And even if it's a small amount. And of course, this is to be balanced with debt, right? Like, as I mentioned earlier, if you are severely in debt, pay off your debt first before you get serious about retirement savings. And so number one, start even if it's a little bit, start now. Regular amounts, automate your deductions, whether it's with your 401k at work, and definitely take the match if you have a match with your employer. If not, you can open a Roth IRA for most people. Again, this may not apply to you per se, depending on your particular situation, but generally speaking, for most people, the Roth IRA is the best retirement account that offers some tax savings and also some flexibility for withdrawal later and for different uses. You can withdraw to pay for college for your kids, for example, without penalty, and also to buy your first home. There are some limitations, but Roth IRA is one of the best ones. And then the types of retirement saving investments, you can look into things like index funds. You'll have to never invest in something you don't understand. So you'll need to do some research into that. But index funds is something to look into, mutual funds, and also target date funds. Those are some of the more accessible type of investments for lay people. You don't need to have an investment degree or business degree to understand them, but you will need to do a little bit of homework. And then another reminder is that retirement savings requires patience. So don't buy and sell in and out, timing the market never works. It's just buy and hold and just leave it there. And sometimes doing nothing is the best plan. So I know there's also the end time scenario. Okay, so I want to mention this very briefly. There is always the question of when do we sell everything? And I've actually done a presentation, and it hasn't been recorded yet, but it'll probably go up on Audioverse eventually, which discusses the Spirit of Prophecy principle on when to sell everything at the end of time. How do we know when that time is? And how do we, know God's will as far as liquidating our assets? Without getting into all the specifics about that, we just know that there is that scenario coming, prophetically speaking. And so we need to understand how to liquidate. We have to understand how to exit our investments. And so our retirement accounts, we need to take that into consideration. So that's a long answer because it's a big question, how to prepare for retirement. I hope that gives you at least a few avenues to consider as you think about that. All right, so here's another question that came in the chat box here. Considering life happens, not necessarily death, but long-term illnesses, how would you advise people to prepare for such what ifs, which can deplete your savings? Excellent, excellent question, because this is absolutely a risk and scenario that we need to consider. So there are a couple things you can think about here. Death, obviously, life insurance, I believe, particularly term life insurance, would be one way to provide for your dependents that rely on your income. What if you are disabled? Okay, so if you are disabled, there is such a thing called long-term disability insurance. Actually, let me back up. Before we get into all the products, financial products and insurance products, I think it's important to remember to have an emergency fund. And the emergency fund comes even before paying off your debt. So at least a small emergency fund. So I tend to agree with Dave Ramsey with his baby steps, if you're familiar with them. First step is to have an emergency fund of $1,000 that you save in a cash savings account, and you don't touch it for any reason except for emergency. And then step 2 for him is to pay off all your debt except your home mortgage. And then step 3 in the baby step is to increase your emergency fund to 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And so that's where I would start. Start with your emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Notice it's not 3 to 6 months of earnings. It's 3 to 6 months of what you actually need to live. And that's a starting point if your job is irregular or you're already in ill health and you feel like perhaps you may not be able to work as much or something like that. Maybe you can bump it up to 9 months, maybe even 12 months of just cash emergency savings. And once you have that in place, then you're looking into types of insurance. And again, this is not necessarily individualized advice. This is just general considerations because each individual situation will be different. But life insurance, we talked about that. Long-term disability insurance is another product that may be worth considering depending on your career. If you are in a very physical job, that insurance can be very expensive. So it might be something that you can buy into with your employer, perhaps. If you buy it individually, it could be expensive. If you are more sedentary, like let's say an office worker, it's going to cost less than say you are a lineman working out on the electric lines, or a farmer or something. So long-term disability insurance, and then another is for people who are a little bit older will be long-term care insurance. And this is somewhat of a new thing because long-term care insurance is relatively new, and it's basically paying for extended care in either a home care situation or a nursing home type situation. And those generally, you don't really need to think about that until you're, mid to late 50s, maybe 60s. And it can be expensive as well. But if it is something that is somewhat of a high risk, that is the way to mitigate against that. So I am not the type of person that recommends everyone buy every type of insurance. Please don't get that impression. I'm just sharing with you some of the options that are out there dependent on your particular risk factor and the situation that you're looking into. But self-insurance, emergency fund, that's where I would start. All right, so hopefully that gives you some ideas. We can always take more in the chat box, but that takes us to the end of our chat box that I can see. So if anyone else has hands raised, we can take those questions next.
Yeah, this is, I had my hand raised again.
Yes,
I have a question about kids and financing. I want to teach my children about finance and how to save and things like that, but I don't know how to give them money without them feeling like entitled. Or like, I know some parents have them do chores and they pay something, and I feel like, no, we're doing chores out of love. We should just be doing chores, and I shouldn't be paying you for doing chores. So how do you balance that? How do you get children to earn something and teach them budgeting and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll be honest with you, my daughter is 5 years old, so she's still a little bit young for us to really employ any of the ideas that we've had so far. But I'll share some of the ideas that may be helpful to you. My wife and I, we tend to agree with you that there are chores in the home that children should just be expected to do because you're part of the family. You shouldn't get paid for things that is just your responsibility. But I believe there are things that are outside of their minimum requirements that can be something that is a little bit extra. So, maybe if, it's like work, right? So it might not be my daughter's responsibility to, let's say, wash the car or to mow the lawn. She's too young to do those things, but supposing she's old enough, it could be one of those things where if you do this, right, it's not a chore, it's not something that you must do, it is a responsibility that you're doing outside of your regular chores, you will get paid. And that helps them understand that money comes from work. It makes that correlation. The other ideas that I haven't practiced myself because my daughter is still too young, but it would be nice to at some point, is to encourage some entrepreneurship ideas. So things that they can do to sell, making little crafts or growing things in the garden. Eventually when they're old enough, canvassing, things like that, where they actually go out and do things where they earn their own money. The proverbial lemonade stand is one of those ideas. And for them to get the experience of earning the money, I think is crucial. And once they earn that money, then it becomes easier to teach them, okay, how do you figure the tithe and the offerings, and how much are you going to save, and what are you actually going to spend the money on? And then they begin to associate, I want to buy this toy, I want to buy these shoes, or whatever it is. They realize money doesn't grow on trees and it's actually a lot of work. So you're on the right track thinking the way that you're thinking. So the main thing is entrepreneurship ideas for them to actually earn money by doing things and being entrepreneurial and having a business idea. And then the other thing is not just the basic chores, but giving them options to earn money doing things that are extra, that is not within their normal responsibilities.
If I could jump in there, just a short on that question. My family was a little unique in that my dad owned a cabinet or had his own business, a cabinet shop. So I grew up, I didn't get paid for chores in the house either. But if I was, like Al said, doing something outside, if I was plowing the snow, or if I was mowing the lawn, other things that my dad would normally have to pay a company or somebody else to do, then he would pay me for that, but not for the normal washing the dishes, helping with the laundry, cleaning the house, taking care of my room, that sort of thing. Also, of course, if I worked in his business, in the shop, helping him, of course, he could pay me for that as well, and at a regular wage that he would have to pay somebody else. Even though I was his son, he probably didn't have to pay me as much as he did, but he wanted me to learn the value of money. If I was working well, he could do that with me. So, but not everyone has that opportunity. So I think maybe looking up ideas of what are home businesses. There's actually quite a few resources I think online of what are home businesses you could start just for the kids to help run. Very, very simple home businesses that would be kind of a side thing, not your normal job, but something that kids could take care of mostly. I don't know if Al has other things to add to that. But.
No, that's excellent, David. That's excellent. And I can tell you from personal experience, David learned his lesson well. He's an excellent worker. So his dad taught him well. So here in the group chat, okay, so Joe has a question here. Are there reasons documented why people delay savings or not save at all? I'm not totally sure I understand the question. Is it like, are there reasons why people should delay savings and why people should not save? Like, are there reasons for that? Or is it just, are there examples of why people don't save? Perhaps, Joe, you can clarify that a little bit.
While he's working on that, is there any other questions that we could answer and then come back to that one? If you want to unmute your mic and jump right in, that's fine. We don't have a bunch of people talking at once, so you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, I think Orion has another question.
Yes, thank you. My question is the situation of like you talked about home improvement, and I mean, you didn't talk about home improvement, but like buying a home and buying small and then, you know, and then working the way up. I guess my question is, what about improvement in, like, if I, like, for example, I still owe money on my house currently, but I want to like improve the house or add an addition or that kind of thing. What's the recommendation on that? Do you have to like, is that considered like an investment that's has potential earnings?
Yeah, well, that one is a little bit tougher because a lot of home additions are fairly user specific, if I can use that term. It may not actually make, it may not necessarily make sense for a renovation for sale. Like a lot of times when people renovate their home, it's to benefit their particular family, their particular situation, but it actually may reduce in some ways the marketability to someone just looking to buy, right? Of course, that varies. Sometimes it can increase the value. So in some ways, home improvements can be detrimental for increasing home value. And the reality is, even in our neighborhood and some of my friends, even they've added on to the house, and it makes the house harder to sell because it's more unique. They have, you know, sort of things that they did specifically for themselves. So if you plan on staying there for a long term, right, and it's something that's going to be practical for your family and to make your life more convenient and you know, space to grow your family or things like that, I don't think there's any problems with that. But if you're looking at it strictly as a financial investment, where if I add on to this house to increase a certain amount of value on the home, then I would check, right? I would check with the realtor or someone who knows the market well and to get a second opinion. So I guess there are two ways to think about this, right? It can be a good investment if it means it helps you and your family live a happier, more productive, you know, more convenient life. But then on the other hand, if you're doing it to increase the value of a home for financial purposes, then it may or may not. It would depend on the particular renovations you're talking about. So I'll just mention this. A lot of times people get this idea like, you know, the mom or the wives who's like, oh, you know, I want a new kitchen. But the excuse to convince the husband is it'll increase the value of the home. Well, it might. It might make the home have better curb appeal and sell a little faster. But a lot of times, particularly if you're not doing the work yourself and you're hiring out and you're paying market rates and all of that, the amount you put into it rarely translates into significant profit on the selling end. that's just my observation. And of course, real estate, it is different from market to market, depends on your neighborhood. You know, there are a lot of variables here. So don't take this to the bank as a guarantee, but many times, you know, upgrading, you know, the kitchen cabinets and the countertops, it might be great. It might be a great investment for the family, but it may not necessarily translate into getting all that money back when you sell the house. So hopefully that give you some ideas to think about, but I don't have a clear answer for that.
Thank you.
All right. Appreciate that question. So Elisha here in the question box says, what would be a comparison for building a house versus buying a house on mortgage? And then business ideas for a stay-at-home mom. Now, I will be honest with you. I don't know much about the financials of buying or building a house. So I really don't have any concrete information to share with you. I don't know if anyone else, you know, maybe David, I know you've done quite a bit of building, but I don't know if anybody has experience with building a house versus buying on a mortgage that they might be willing to chime in on, but I'm unfortunately not going to be an expert on that.
I'm not an expert either. The little I do know is many times if you are able to do the building yourself, or at least a good portion of it, I think you can many times come out ahead choosing to build your house versus buying. But in a hot market, especially as we have here in Minnesota, most of the time, you hiring contractors to build a custom home for you, you will end up probably spending more money per square foot, even though it might be configured exactly the way you want, but you may significantly spend more money per square foot than you would in buying a home that's already been built. And that's a little bit I know on that. But it depends. And of course, mortgages, can you get a construction loan or not? I mean, there's a lot of variables in that, but that's just a short snippet on that.
That's a great point, David. And I will mention it's related to the home renovations is that custom tends to not sell well because people may not like what you like, right? That's just the way we are. So, you know, maybe I want, you know, a certain layout, or I want, you know, I want an outlet and every 4 feet on every wall, or I want, you know, a kitchen to be arranged a certain way, or, you know, certain things to be built in certain configurations. So custom may not necessarily result in best resale value on the back end if ever you were to move. So I think that's a consideration as well. So the other question from Elisha is business ideas for stay-at-home moms. So I know a little bit about this because I have a stay-at-home mom at home, and I work with a number of stay-at-home moms at Audioverse. So the best I can tell you is that if the stay-at-home mom have skills that can be sold in the digital marketplace, an online skill set, maybe an accountant or a executive assistant or graphic design or writing, those types of things, you can sell your services as a contractor from home. And I have seen some people do remarkably well doing that. And that tends to be a little bit easier to keep your schedule. And, you know, particularly with kids and homeschool, I assume homeschool, maybe just bringing them to school or other things like that. So if you can keep your overhead low, so you're just a service provider, you have an internet connection and a computer, keep that as small as possible, you're going to have the best chances of success in a financially lucrative type of home situation. Because beyond that, there are other things, like there's e-commerce. You can do e-commerce and various types of things. You know, it could be Etsy, it could be eBay, it could be selling an online course, or some people get into podcasting and YouTube and things like that, where you end up having to create an entire business. If people have the interest and the desire to do that, they can certainly make it work. You know, I know people who have turned, you know, and a hobby doing recipe a cooking blog, and it's turned into like a 6-figure a year type of career. So it's certainly possible. But if you're going to go that route, it ends up being starting an actual business. It's not just something on the side. So, you know, the best, sort of the best of both worlds, where you can have reasonable income with flexibility and not a huge amount of commitment, and not having to sort of arrange a whole life around the business, is some sort of professional service as a contractor that you can do remotely online. So yeah, that would be the best I can offer you on that one. So, all right. Let's see who else we've got. So Orion, is your hand up again, or was that from before?
Sorry, it was from before. Let me put it down.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Any other questions for Al? We had excellent questions. Great discussion we've been having. So, any others?
All right. So there's a question for you, David, in the chat.
Yes, I'll be posting that here momentarily.
Yes, and
The
the
videos will not be posted momentarily. They will take a little longer to get up, but the website's right there, so you can go back to that or bookmark it, and then they'll be in the media section on the website.
Yeah, and I will send David the notes after this.
All right, if there's no other questions, I just want to thank Alistair for coming virtually and answering our questions and presenting a Adventist biblical perspective on finance. And I've learned a lot, and sounds like from all the questions and discussion that others have as well. So I just want to thank you again, Al, for coming, and hopefully we'll maybe get to have you over here again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I'm glad to have met you virtually. And yeah, Lord willing, we can do this in person someday.
Yeah.